Join us at Women of Courage and celebrate the achievements of women. The Michigan primaries and the general election are coming up, so we thought we should say something about why you should vote. Elizabeth Wallis from the League of Women Voters in Texas says here are some reasons why you should vote. She says if nobody votes, it's not a democracy. If you don't vote, people will not take you seriously. Voting is how you define yourself as part of something larger than yourself. Number four, if you do not vote, someone else will make the decisions for you. Voting is part of your independence. Number five, it matters. It matters to the future of you, your family, and your community. Six, people who don't vote are letting down their families and their communities. Moms, do you have an 18-year-old in your family? If so, give him or her register and be certain they vote. 8. Refusing to vote isn't a rebellion, it's a surrender. Number 9. Love your country. Prove it by voting. Number 10. Voting is the great equalizer. The richest billionaire in America gets just one vote, the same as you and me. Number 11. What do the smart people do? They vote. They are voters. Number 12. Elections have consequences. Be a voter. Elected officials make all the big decisions and they listen to the people who vote. Number 14. If you don't vote, you're invisible to the elected officials who make all the big decisions. Number 15. Did you know people with money spend billions of dollars on elections? Billions spent for television ads, mailers, people to make phone calls and to knock on doors. The smart people spending all that money are trying to influence the voters. If it didn't matter, they wouldn't do it. Number 16. If you don't vote because you think your vote doesn't matter, then the people who don't want you to vote because you are afraid of how your vote will not win. Number 17. Bad people are elected by the good people who did not vote. Hundreds of thousands of Americans have died to protect your right to vote. You owe it to them to vote. 19. Voting is the right thing to do. Start preparing to vote now. Go and register at the Secretary of State's office. Find out where your polling place is and be prepared to be the first person in line to vote that day. If you do not have transportation to the polling place, call your local library and find out who is offering free transportation to polling locations. Remember, vote. Last time we discussed the lives of 17 black women. These were women that participated in the civil rights movement. They performed exceptionally. Most of these women were just ordinary, average women, except they wanted change to take place in their lives and in the neighborhood and in the lives of their friends and families. So they got up and did something. We introduced these 17 women to you because we wanted you to compare yourself to these women. Why can't you live a life the way these women lived their lives? You need to ask yourself this question. You need to ask yourself, what am I doing to participate in life to bring about a change so my children can live a better life than what I lived? If you cannot come up with a reason why you are not participating in life, then you need to take a serious, hard look at yourself And you need to look at the people who you are living around, the people that you consult for advice, the people who you listen to. This is extremely important. If you do not change, what do you expect from the lives of your children? All you can expect is that they're going to end up prostituting themselves, selling dope, or ending up in prison. Did you have bring your children into the world for these children to go their lives to go down the drain? Well, if you brought your children into the world because you love them, then you must stand up and fight for their lives, which means that you're going to have to go back to school, which means you're going to have to change your life, which means you're going to have to clean your house, which means you're going to have to learn how to manage your time. Life is not something that you play with. You don't have time to sit and gossip. You don't have time to be talking about somebody else's breast and butt. You don't have time for foolishness. You don't have time to be sitting up smoking marijuana. Last week we had a report of a woman. She wanted to sit down and have a good time smoking marijuana, so she gave her child some cold medicine. She ended up killing her child. She poisoned her child with this cold medicine so she could have time to smoke marijuana. Is that not unbelievably stupid? If this woman was a reader, she would have known you cannot give children noxious substances like that. Their bodies cannot process those chemicals. Now this woman is facing murder charges for killing her infant child. Is that unbelievably stupid? Once you bring a child into the world, you are responsible for the life of that child. Period. It is unconditional. That's the way life is. When you bring a child into the world, you are responsible for that child. Then you need to educate yourself and learn some discipline so that that child can live a healthy life. If you do not feel good about yourself, then go see a psychiatrist. Go talk to a psychologist. If you're bringing unrelated men into your home every other month, you need to go see a psychiatrist. If you're trying to screw every man in the world, trying to prove how better you are than somebody else, you need to see a psychiatrist. Something is wrong with the way that you think. If you go out to bars trying to find a man so he can give you $30 to pay your light bill, something's wrong with the way you think. That's a stupid proposition. You're going to take a chance on your life by contacting AIDS just to get somebody, screw a man so he can give you some money. And why are you so worried about your butt size and your breast size? You want to go have an operation so you can enhance your butt, as they call it, so you can have a larger butt to attract men, and you're going to take a chance on your life and leave your children here motherless. That doesn't make any sense. You need to be satisfied with the body that God gave you and go on with it. You don't have time to sit down moaning why your feet is a size 9 or why they're a size 11 and why you got a big nose and a flat face. You ain't got time for that foolishness. You have to get up and earn a living to make certain that your children have what they need to become strong adults who can take care of themselves, who can make good decisions and not stupid decisions like going to try to rob somebody and steal someone's purse when they don't even know how much money they got in their wallet or purse. Stop using poverty as an excuse. Yes, poverty is hell, but you can come out of it because other people have come out of it. But you have to have discipline. You're going to have to want to do it. And if you're around stupid talking people, you need to get away from them because that's what's pulling you down. Anyone that's not going in a good direction in their life, you need to leave them alone. And I have some more black women that I want to discuss with you. The women are Gloria Richardson, Alice Ball, Mary Church Terrell, Jackie Mabley, Elaine Brown, Jane Boland, Anna Julia Cooper, Melba Roy Mouton. Gloria Richardson was a civil rights activist. She led the Cambridge movement based in Maryland. She was trained as a social worker, but she was not able to work in her field because The Cambridge, Maryland city government would not hire black social workers. In 1962, she organized the Cambridge Nonviolent Action Committee, the first adult led affiliate of the Student Nonviolence Coordinating Committee. The Cambridge Committee began staging sit ins, and by the end of 1963, the Cambridge schools, hospitals, libraries, and buses became desegregated. Alice Balls was a chemist. She is best known for developing the injectable extract that served as the most effective treatment for leprosy until the 1940s. In 1915, Miss Balls became the first African American and the first woman to earn a master's degree from the University of Hawaii. In 1916, Alice Balls developed the oil extract, which was used for the treatment of leprosy. She died the same year before her research could be published. Mary Church Terrell was an activist and a writer. Miss Terrell was one of the first African American women to earn a college degree. She was born to a former slave in 1863. She was appointed to the District of Columbia Board of Education between the year 1895 and 1906. She was the first black woman in the United States to hold that position. In 1896, she founded the National Association of College Women. That organization is now known as the National Association of University Women. Mary Terrell also had a successful career as a journalist. Her writings were published in the Washington Post and the Chicago Defender. In addition, the women's rights activists helped to push the 19th Amendment through Congress, which gave the women the right to vote in 1920. She died in 1954. They recognized this name. Her name was Jackie Mabley. They called her Moms. Mabley would go on to be billed as the funniest woman in the world. Moms Mabley got her start in vaudeville. During the height of her career, she made $10,000 a week at the Harlem's Apollo Theater. Miss Mabley also performed at Carnegie Hall in 1962. She appeared in numerous TV shows, including The Smothers Brothers, Comedy Hour. Her performances influenced a generation of comics, including Bill Cosby, Whoopi Goldberg, Bernie Mac, Richard Pryor, Wanda Sykes, and Eddie Murphy. She died in 1975 at the age of 81. Elaine Brown was a criminal justice activist and a writer. Miss Brown was the chairwoman of the Black Panther Party from 1974 to 1977. She was the first woman to chair the group. In 2003, Miss Brown co-founded the National Alliance for Radical Prison Reform, an organization that helps prisoners find housing after they are released, facilitate transportation for family visits to prison, help prisoners find employment, and raise money for prisoners' phone calls and gifts. In 2008, she was briefly the Green Party presidential nominee. Since 2008, Ms. Brown has continued her activism and her lecture series called The New Age Racism in America. This lecture series has run in more than 40 universities in the United States. Jane Bowen was the first black woman to join the New York City Bar Association and the first to join the New York City Law Department. In 1939, she became the first African American female judge in the United States. An outspoken critic and activist for civil rights, women's rights, and children's rights. Ms. Bowen was also the first African American woman to graduate from Yale Law School. She died in 2007. This is the woman who suffered malnutrition while going through school. Anna Cooper was a prominent author. She was an educator and a scholar. She was born into slavery in 1858. She went on to become a prominent educator and a speaker in the Washington, D.C. area. In 1892, While working as a teacher at a Washington, D.C. M Street school, Miss Cooper published her first book, A Voice from the South. At the age of 65, she became the fourth African American woman to earn a doctorate. Miss Cooper died in 1964 at the age of 105. Think about it, she earned her doctorate degree at the age of 65. Roy Moulton was a NASA mathematician at the Goddard Space Flight Center in Maryland in 1964. She was a 1950th graduate of Howard University. She was the Assistant Chief of Research Programs at NASA's Trajectory and Geodynamic Division in the 1960s, and she headed a group of NASA mathematicians known as computers. She died in 1990. Did you know that there was a black female battalion during the Second World War? It was formed through the efforts of Mary Methune asked Eleanor Roosevelt to help her create a more meaningful role for black women to serve in the Army. Eleanor Roosevelt agreed to help. She helped develop a military that created space for all black female group to work in the war in Europe. Women were recruited and trained until May 1942, when the Women's Auxiliary Army Corps was formed. In 1945, history was made when the first all-black female battalion in the world was sent from the United States to serve in parts of Europe during the Second World War. It became known as the 688th Central Postal Directory Battalion. The battalion was sent to parts of France and England to contribute to solving the problem that the Second World War brought. 855 women served under the command of Major Charity Williams. The unit was called the 688. They worked under dangerous and risky conditions in abandoned and infested aircrafts and offices throughout the war. The women received the European African Middle Eastern Campaign Medal, the Good Conduct Medal, and the World War II Victory Medal. You must remember why these women were important. Black women participated in the Civil War by dressing up as males. Some of the women portrayed themselves as white soldiers. It was only when these individuals were found dead did the military learn that the soldier was actually a female. The names of these women are lost to history. During the World War I, black females were not allowed to serve. Only white women served in the Army during World War I. Remember, racism at that time was still rampant. Ella Josephine Baker is the next woman I want to talk about. Miss Baker is extensive. The only thing I can say is you must read her history. I cannot do her justice here. I can say she worked for civil rights for 5 decades. She was working the day she died in New York on her birthday at the age of 83 on December 13, 1986. She was not only concerned about the treatment of black women, but also the treatment of Puerto Rican women. She served in key positions in several civil rights organizations, such as SNCC and the NAACP. She worked with Du Bois. She worked with Martin Luther King. She attended DeShaw University. She worked as a field secretary and then served as a director of various branches from 1943 until 1946. She was inspired by the boycott in Montgomery, Alabama in 1959. She became the co-founder of the Friendship to raise money to fight against Jim Crow laws in the Deep South. You must read her history. Her life demonstrates that you can do what you want to do with your life if you will only try and change. Now to the life of Mary Ann Shade. Miss Shade was born in the state of Delaware. Her father worked as a shoemaker and he helped with the Underground Railroad. Quite naturally, she was involved with escaped slaves. She moved to Canada from Delaware in 1851. She moved to Canada to help educate the slaves who were fleeing the United States. She started the first integrated school in Canada after a great opposition. Black and white abolitionists opposed the school. They believed in separate but equal. She then became the first female newspaper editor. This happened because she had a dispute with Henry Bibbs, who owned the newspaper The Voice of the Fugitive. Mr. Bibbs attacked her character and her beliefs that integration was necessary for progress. Miss Shade believed that having separate churches, separate schools, and separate communities would ultimately undermine the search for freedom. She said integration would require self-sufficiency, but it also meant living and working with one another. After this adventure, Mary Shade became the first black female attorney in North America. Her fight for education and equality for blacks led her to study law. She graduated from Howard University and she began practicing law at the age of 60. She refused to accept socially imposed limits on blacks or whites. Ms. Shade's contribution shows how perseverance and the refusal to accept the status quo can help you achieve. We're going to discuss someone that was in the news recently. Baltimore City State Attorney Marilyn Mosby traveled to St. Louis, Missouri in January 2020 to support the St. Louis Circuit Attorney Kim Gardner for filing a civil rights lawsuit against the city and the police union, alleging that they were coordinating a racist conspiracy meant to force her out of office. Ms. Gardner is the first black woman elected as a top prosecutor in St. Louis, and the lawsuit appears to mark the first time an elected local prosecutor has brought a federal case against the police union for racially motivated civil rights violations. Apparently, the police union wants her out so things can go back the way that they were. Remember, it is the prosecutor who determines if a case is brought before the court. A group of attorneys are supporting her fight for justice. They are working to undo mass incarceration in colored communities. Well before she could return home, Miss Mosley received a text message about her involvement in helping Miss Garner. It says, "If we'd known you were all going to be this effing trouble, we would have picked our own effing cotton." Attorney Mosley received some more hateful messages, so she posted them on her Twitter page. "This is why stand with Kim Gardner, and this hateful rhetoric only strengthens my resolve to continue fighting for justice and working to undo the blight of mass incarceration and its impact on the communities of color. Keeper of the status quo," came a caption. Attorney Mosley went on to say, "These are the types of attacks we encounter every day as women of color in a position of authority, and I traveled to St. Louis, Missouri because this is the unfortunate experience of black female prosecutors everywhere. It is deeply disturbing that in 2020 we still have to experience such blatant racism, but this hateful rhetoric only strengthens my resolve to continue fighting for justice." The lawsuit that Attorney Gardner filed in the Eastern District of Missouri was supported by other leading black female prosecutors across this country. Please note that 1 out of 3 black men will serve time in prison. They will be sentenced to 20 years or more, longer than any other ethnic group. Here's another woman that's in the news. In 2019, Brianna Collins, an American television anchor, broke the industry standards and started wearing braids on the air. She had been working in the news industry for about 4 years, and she had been wanting to wear braids for a long time. Ms. Collins decided to take a chance and asked her news team if it was something she could do. During an interview, she said, "I honestly wanted to wear my hair in braids to try something different. I was tired of doing my hair every day, and it just seems easier if wearing braids." At the station that she worked with was 100% supportive of her choice. Brianna Collins' break with protocol prompted A.J. Walker, an investigative news reporter from West Palm Beach, Florida, to do the same. During her interview, Ms. Collins went on to say, "Wearing straight hair on screen has always been the industry standard, and anything else was deemed to be different and unprofessional. That industry standard makes no sense to me. I think the focus should be more directed on a journalist's ability to tell a fair and balanced story than what's going on in their head." Advice to others was, "Be yourself, the world will adjust." She added that she wanted women who feel like they're being discriminated against to speak up. Go through the proper channels and don't feel like you don't have options to take action against those who may have wronged you. Here's a brief note about a high school student. Antoinette Love of New Orleans, Louisiana, was accepted at 116 colleges and was offered scholarships totaling $3.7 million. Did you know in the 1930s that there was a black woman that drove a Harley Davidson across the country? She rode a motorcycle across the country in 1930s. See if you can find her name. So, do you know the first Rhodes Scholar for the University of Connecticut? She is a black female. See if you can find her name. I am going to pause for a second to take a short break while you listen to information regarding willpower and encouragement. It is all a matter of learning new behaviors. And please remember, it is easier to build strong minds than to repair injured people. What I said is a modification of a quote by Frederick Douglass. He said, "It is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men." Now, please tell your friends and family about our broadcast and invite them to listen to us every Friday from 3 to 4 p.m. and every Sunday from 8 to 9 a.m. on 88.1 FM WHPR. You can email us at murderedvoices@gmail.com to learn more about our programs and how you can become involved. You can find inspirational articles by the Women of Courage Show by visiting the website touchedbythelight.us. You can read some of our essays on your lunch hour. These articles will help you last throughout the day. They will inspire you not to quit.
Today, I want to talk about response. How do you personally respond to a setback in your life? I heard a pastor once say, "Don't let a bad chapter in your life be the final chapter." And that really hit me. How often do we let one bad thing in our life own us? You lost your job, your family left you, you struggle with abuse or addiction. Those things do happen in life. But that's not what you focus on. You focus on the response. How do I move forward now? What do I do now? Real faith is believing in something big, but willing to start small. want to talk today about commitment. The act of making an agreement or a pledge to do something in the future. Now listen, we are all called by God, and through Him is our strength. So during these times, these hardships, we need to stay committed. Committed to His Word, committed to freeing yourself from the negativity, committed to empowering yourself, bettering yourself, and living your life to the fullest. Through God, all is possible. Once you believe, and once you are committed. You are the women of courage. Today, I want to talk about self-control, the restraint exercised over one person's impulses, emotions, or desires. It is easy nowadays to lose control. We eat too much, drink too much, everything is accessible to us. The hard part in life is finding that balance, that presence of mind to know what is good for you, and to live with that discipline. I know through my own journey that when I am balanced, when I'm showing self-restraint, I start moving better. I start thinking better. I become more confident in who I am. And that's what I want you to think about. What can you do to become more balanced, to act on need and not on emotion? Remember, you are the women of courage.
The next list that I'm getting ready to read is a list that I really don't want to discuss, but I have to. These were people that were murdered when they were trying to register people for votes, when they were just trying to use a bathroom, when they were just found on the street, and because they were black. The reason why I'm reading this list and the reason why these people are important is because they were trying to give people the right to vote. They put their bodies on the line so we would be given the right to vote. And I think anyone that does not go to the polls, that refuses to vote or has says that they don't have any time, think about these people who gave their lives so you could have the right to vote. November, we have a very important election. Please get out and vote. Now, here are the people that I want to discuss. The first man was Reverend George Lee. He was murdered May 7th, which is my birthday, 1955, in Bozzone, Mississippi. He was one of the first black people registered to vote in Humphrey County, Mississippi. He used his pulpit and his printing press to urge other people to vote. White officials offered Lee protection on the condition that he end his voter registration efforts. When he would not, he was murdered. Mar Smith was murdered August 13th, 1955, in Brookhaven, Mississippi. He was shot to death on the courthouse lawn by a white man in broad daylight while people watched. The person who shot Mr. Smith was never indicted because no one would admit they saw him shoot a black man. Smith had organized blacks to vote in a recent election, and the white man was mad. Louis Teal was murdered August 28th, 1955, in Money, Mississippi. His father had been killed during World War II. Emmett Till was 14 years old and he was vacationing from Chicago. Supposedly, he insulted some white woman in a store, and three white men took offense to it. Well, they kidnapped him, they beat him, they shot him, and they dumped his body in the Tallahassee River. An all white jury found his assassins innocent. John Earl Reese was 16 years old. He was dancing in a cafe when white men fired a shot in through the window, killing him and two others were wounded. Took place October 22nd, 1955 in Mayflower, Texas. The shooting was part of an attempt by white men to terrorize blacks into giving up their plans for a new school. Willie Edwards Jr. was murdered January the 23rd, 1957 in Montgomery, Alabama. He was a truck driver. He was on his way to work when four Klansmen stopped him and decided that he was dating a white woman. They forced him at gunpoint to jump off of a bridge into the Alabama River. Edward's body was found 3 months later. Charles Parker, aged 23, was accused of raping a white woman. 3 days before he was supposed to go to trial on April the 25th, 1959, in Poplarville, Mississippi, a white mob beat him. They took him from the jail. They beat him, they shot him, and then threw him in the Pearl River. Herbert Lee was murdered September the 25th, 1961, in Liberty, Mississippi. He worked with civil rights leader Bob Moses to help register black voters. He was killed by a state legislator who said that he shot Mr. Lee in self-defense. He was never arrested. Lewis Allen, who was a black man who witnessed the murder, was later shot and killed. Corporal Roman Ducksworth Jr. was murdered April 9, 1962 in Taylorsville, Mississippi. He was a military police officer in Maryland. He was on leave to visit his sick wife when he was taken from a bus by a police officer and shot to death. Paul Gaward was murdered September 30th, 1962 in Oxford, Mississippi. He was a reporter for a French news service. He was killed by gunfire from a white mob during a protest over the admission of James Merritt into the University of Mississippi. William Lewis Moore, who is white, was murdered April 23rd, 1963 in Alabama. He was a postman from Baltimore. He was shot and killed during a one-man march against segregation. Moore had planned to deliver a letter to the governor of Mississippi urging an end to tolerance. Medgar Evers was shot to death June 12, 1963 in Jackson, Mississippi. He was director of the NAACP in Mississippi. He was leading a campaign for integration in Jackson when he was shot and killed by a sniper in his driveway. September the 15th, 1963, in Birmingham, Alabama, four young girls were murdered when a bomb was placed in the 16th Street Baptist Church. The four little girls that were killed was Addie Mae Collins, Denise McNair, Carol Robinson, and Cynthia Wesley. Lamar Ware, who was age 13, was shot and killed September the 15th, 1963 in Birmingham, Alabama. He was riding on the handlebars of his brother's bike when white teenagers fatally shot him. Lewis Allen was murdered January the 31st, 1964 in Liberty, Mississippi. He had witnessed the murder of Herbert Lee. Continuously harassed and jailed and threats. He finally decided to move north. The day he was moving, he was shot to death. Miss Johnny Mae Chapel was shot to death March 23rd, 1964 in Jacksonville, Florida. She was walking along the roadside. She was going to get ice cream for her children. The men who shot her to death were looking for someone to kill. And Bruce Clunder was murdered April 7th, 1964. He came from Cleveland, Ohio. He was a civil rights activist who protested the building of a segregated school by placing their bodies in the way of construction equipment. He was crushed to death when a bulldozer backed over him. White men aren't afraid to kill. They know nothing's going to happen to them. Hezekiah D. and Charles Eddie Moore were killed by Klansmen May 2nd, 1964 in Meadville, Mississippi. They believed the two men were trying to arm blacks. Bodies were found when the civil rights were reported missing. Earl Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner were murdered June 21st, 1964 in Philadelphia, Mississippi. They were civil rights workers. They were arrested by the sheriffs and then released into the hands of Klansmen who killed them. They were shot to death and their bodies were buried. Three men could not be buried together in Mississippi. Lieutenant Colonel Leamer Penn was murdered July 1st, 1964 in Colbert, Georgia. He was from Washington, D.C., and he was an educator. He was driving home from the U.S. Army Reserve training when he was shot and killed by Klansmen passing him by in their car. Jimmy Lee Jackson was murdered February 26, 1965, in Marion, Alabama. He was beaten and shot by state troopers when he was trying to protect his mother and grandfather, who were being attacked by state troopers during the Civil Rights March. His death led to the Selma Montgomery March and the eventual passage of the Voting Rights Act. Reverend James Reeb, he's also a white clergyman. He was murdered March 11, 1965 in Selma, Alabama. He was a Unitarian minister from Boston, and he was among several white clergymen who joined the Selma March after the attack by the state troopers. Reverend James Reeb was beaten to death by white men when he was walking down a Selma street. Bill Moore was murdered June 2nd, 1965 in Bogalusa, Louisiana. He was one of two black deputies hired by white officials in an attempt to appease civil rights demands. Moore and his partner Creed Rogers were on patrol when they were shot from a passing car. Moore died and Rogers was wounded. Brewster was murdered July 18, 1965 in Anniston, Alabama. He was on his way home from work when he was shot and killed by white men. These men belonged to the National State Right Party. It was a violent neo-Nazi group. They liked to kill black men. Myrick Daniels was murdered August 20th, 1965 in Haynesville, Alabama. He was an Episcopalian seminary student in Boston. He had come to Alabama to help blacks register people to vote. He was arrested at a demonstration. He was jailed in Haynesville and then suddenly released. Right after he was released, he was shot to death by a deputy sheriff. And you notice white men don't mind shooting and killing people. Neil Lehman Young Jr. was murdered January 3rd, 1966 in Tuskegee, Alabama. He was a student civil rights activist. He was fatally shot by a gas station owner after an argument over a segregated restroom. Vernon Ferdinand Delmer was murdered January 10th, 1966 in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Mr. Dahmer was a wealthy business person and he offered to pay the poll tax for anyone who could not afford the fee required to vote. The night after a radio station broadcast where Mr. Dahmer made the offer, his house was firebombed. Mr. Dahmer died from severe burns. Chester White was murdered June 10th, 1966 in Natchez, Mississippi. He had worked most of his life as a caretaker on a plantation. He had no involvement in civil rights work. He was murdered by the Klansmen who thought they could divert attention from a civil rights march by killing a black person. Clarence Trigg was murdered July 30th, 1966 in Bogalusa, Louisiana. He worked as a bricklayer who had attended civil rights meetings sponsored by the Congress on Racial Equality. He was found dead on the roadside. He had been shot in the head. Do you understand why you should vote? Never miss any occasion to vote. Wallace Jackson was murdered February the 27th, 1967 in Natchez, Mississippi. He was the treasurer of his local NAACP chapter and was one of the many blacks who received threatening notices from the Klan at his job. After Jackson was promoted to a position that was previously held by whites, a bomb was planted in his car. It exploded minutes after he left work, killing him instantly. Niggas can't be equal to white men. Benjamin Brown was murdered May 12, 1967 in Jackson, Mississippi. He was a former civil rights organizer. He was watching a student protest from the sidelines when he was hit by stray gunfire from police who fired into the crowd. February 8, 1968, three men were murdered in Orangeville, South Carolina. The men were Samuel Hammond Jr., Delano Herman Middleton, and Henry Ezekiel Smith. They were shot and killed by police who fired on student demonstrators in South Carolina State College campus. You notice nothing has been said about these men being shot. They're always talking about the killing in Kent State University. April 4th, 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was shot in Memphis, Tennessee. He was killed just before he was going to have a demonstration in Memphis. Viola Gregg Luzo was an activist in the civil rights movement in the 1960s. She was murdered by members of the Ku Klux Klan for her efforts. She was born April 11, 1925. She was murdered in Selma, Alabama in 1965. She left her home in Michigan, a husband and 5 children, to go to Alabama to help the Southern Christian Leadership Conference register voters. She was murdered March 25th, 1965. She was shot in the face by Klansmen driving in a car beside her. All she was doing was transporting people back and forth to be registered to vote and other activities. Her funeral was held March 30th, 1965, and the United Auto Workers President Walter P. Reuther attended her funeral. Jim Hoffa attended her funeral. She was buried in Southfield, Michigan. After her death, J. Edgar Hoover tried to smear her reputation. The defendants who were arrested were acquitted by an all-white jury on state charges. They were later brought up on federal charges. Miss Viola Luzo was 39 years old when she was murdered. She was a member of the Detroit chapter of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. She's the only white woman that was killed during the civil rights era. If your vagina isn't working for you and you have a house filled with children and no husband, then you need to change. You need to start reading to learn how to win at life. You will learn a woman should never be without money. If you have to choose between eating and spending your last dollar, you need to drink water. Never spend your last dollar. Drink water. Learn that you can gain freedom through reading and writing. Power can be black or green. Take care of yourself first. Otherwise, you will not be able to take care of anyone else. You need to visit the website touchedbythelight.us to read inspirational articles and to watch inspirational videos. These articles and videos can lead you out of the darkness. You must read. You can no longer keep conducting your life based on information that you learned 10, 15, or 20 years ago. Stop relying on what your friends have to say and their opinions. Read and get the facts and take control of your life. If you cannot read or you have a problem reading, find someone at the library that can help you. Stop wasting your life away by drinking alcohol and smoking marijuana just because you feel bad. Dear listeners, help us save a life. Stop breast cancer from taking lives. Will you assist us in putting the booklet Black Women and Breast Cancer in the hands of a million people? Please go to the website www.touchedbythelight.us and download the booklet Black Women and Breast Cancer. Then email this booklet to 5 friends, asking them to email the booklet to 5 of their friends. We are trying to reach a million women with this information to save lives. The death of one woman to breast cancer from our community is one woman too many. We thank you for your support. Become a sponsor of the Women of Courage show by inviting 10 women for a pleasant afternoon to listen to us speak at your venue. Help us change our community to one of peace and harmony. The Women of Courage show is supported by the Women and Children's Restoration Ministries to help women problem solve and to help women realize their dreams. Women should believe that anything is possible. Our sole purpose is the restoration of injured women, both physically and mentally. We meet twice a month on Saturday at a local restaurant to discuss subjects germane to women. We see 5 main problems of black women that we must solve ourselves. One is the sexual abuse of children, bringing unrelated males into the home and fail to notice changes in behavior. Rape and murder of black women, failure to learn the warning signs. Breast cancer, which is a failure to be examined. Sex trafficking of black women. Accepting prostitution as a way of life. Economic trials of black women due to the inability to read or lack of education. Learn how to sponsor the Women of Courage show by speaking to our spokesperson, Renee of WHPR. She can be reached at renee88.1fm at gmail.com. I repeat, renee88.1fm at gmail.com. She will tell you all about it, or you can leave a message at the number 734-686-1444. Thank you. Reading is one of the most important activities that a person can participate in. A world of information is available to you. This information can help you shape and change not only your life but the lives of your children and spouse. Visit the website touchedbythelight.us and find yourself a book to read. For more information, you can email us at murderedvoices@gmail.com. Remember, if you miss one of our shows, you can visit our YouTube channel at Touched by the Light Publishing to watch and listen to previous episodes of Women of Courage. Thank you. Here are some more reasons why you should vote whenever there is an election. Number one, elections have consequences. You have the power to decide on the quality of life you want for yourself and future generations. Voting is your chance to stand up for the issues you care about, like public transportation, raising the minimum wage, or funding local schools. This is your life. Take the time to help decide what is best. Not voting means you are giving up your voice. Elections are decided by the people who go out and vote. Take some time and learn about the measures and the candidates and the issues. If you don't vote, someone else will make the decision for you. Your power is in your vote. Number three, it is your money. You pay taxes, but you do not know how the money is being used. Most people don't. Voting is your chance to choose how your tax dollars should be spent, such as funding for health care and social services. Food stamps are very important to the elderly. Voice your concern by voting. Voting is an opportunity for change. Do you want to make a positive impact with your life? Voting gives you that chance. Support the candidates and the ballot measures that can help your community and your state and even the nation for the greater good. Make your voice heard in these elections. The community depends on you. Our communities are made up of friends, loved ones, neighbors, and children. Some may not know how important voting is, while others don't have the privilege. Make the decision to vote for yourself and those around you. Make sure your voice is heard. Vote in all upcoming elections. Make certain that your voice is heard. Start preparing now to vote. Go and register at the Secretary of State's office. Find out where your polling place is located and be prepared to be the first person in line on the voting day. If you do not have transportation to the polling place, call your local library and find out who is offering transportation to polling locations. Regardless, you must vote. Thank you for listening to Women of Courage and have a great day.